The sun set low over the hills of Abyssinia, casting long shadows across the small village where Robert Jr. grew up. Though only a child at the time, memories of his homeland would shape his life in ways he couldn't yet imagine. Cobblestones lined the streets of his village. The scent of spiced bread and freshly brewed coffee filled the air. People here didn't have much, but what they lacked in wealth, they made up for in stories. Robert Sr. was the kind of father, a man full of stories about Robert. He was an historian by trade and a dreamer by heart, telling stories about how their forefathers once stood tall to the colonial forces, building up a nation so proud of what they were, who they came from. Robert, our past will unlock the key to the future. Just remember where you come from whenever you lose your way. However, this peace of the village did not last for long. The political situation in Abyssinia started gaining steam in the late 1970s. War and displacement was something Robert's father often spoke of, but made sure not to reveal it too harshly to his son. But 8-year-old Robert still knew how much fear his mother was holding on to when she said his name, and the way his father's hands trembled as he packed a small suitcase one evening. "Why do we have to leave?" Robert asked, his small hands clutching his father's arm. "To keep you safe," his father replied, forcing a smile. "Sometimes, son, we must embrace change, even when it scares us." Everything has not been an easy ride since hitting America. Night travel, borderline crossing, overcrowded refugee camp waiting is what they could endure. More than half the journey was accompanied by Robert being slung on his mom's back, Hannah whispering into his ear saying prayers of thanks in their tongue. When they finally reached New York City, it was winter, and Robert had never seen that season before. The cold nipped at his skin, and the skyscrapers towered above him like giants. It was nothing like the open landscape of Abyssinia. Here, the air reeked of gasoline and ambition, and people rushed past without so much as a glance. Their new home was a small apartment in Queens, shared with another family from their village. The apartment was cramped, with peeling paint and a single heater that barely worked, but it was a start. For Robert, change was too much to bear. He didn't understand English, and the classmates at school mocked his accent and the clothes passed down to him. He clung to the old memories of home and was barely trying to get used to this strange world around him. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at school, Robert sat on the fire escape outside their apartment, looking out at the city lights. His father came out and put a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Robert," he said, "do you know why I named you after me?" The boy shook his head. "Because I wanted you to carry my dreams forward. I may not have achieved everything I hoped for, but you can. This city, this life, it's full of challenges, but it's also full of opportunities. You just have to be brave enough to see them." Inspired by the words of his father, Robert started exploring his creative side. He spent much time in the local library reading books on filmmaking and storytelling. He had no camera but would sketch out storyboards in an old notebook his mother had given him. One day, a talent show was announced at school. Being nervous, he decided to join it. He wrote a short play for himself. A boy had left his home in quest of finding himself in a strange land, something like himself. He made use of cardboard boxes and old sheets to make the props, and gave heart and soul into the performance. As the day of the talent show dawned, Robert trembled as he stepped onto the stage. As he began acting, however, something changed. For the first time in his life, he felt that connection with his audience. By the end of the play, the small auditorium erupted in applause. His teacher approached him after. "Robert, you have a gift," she said. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." That night, Robert sat with his father on the same fire escape, the cool winter air biting at their faces. "I think I know what I want to do," he said. "And what's that?" his father asked. "I want to tell stories about people like us, who've been through so much but still keep going. I want the world to see what I see." His father smiled, though his eyes glistened with tears. "Then you'll do it, Robert. No matter how hard it gets, you'll find a way." But the journey was not without its challenges. Robert had many setbacks over the years, from financial struggles to cultural barriers. He took on odd jobs to save money for a second-hand camera and spent sleepless nights honing his craft. Yet through it all, he clung to his father's words: "Embrace change, and the world will embrace you back." Years had passed since the boy from Abyssinia first arrived in America. Robert Jr., now in his late 20s, had come a long way from the shy, homesick child who sketched storyboards in an old notebook. Yet, success hadn't come easy. Every step forward seemed to come with 2 steps back, and there were moments when giving up felt like the only option. Robert had graduated from a small community college, and then at film school, always juggling the jobs as well as sleepless nights to pay tuition. He often found himself isolated at the periphery of things, his contemporaries so polished and self-assured, he clinging to tales of a bygone past. But it were these stories' facts of resilience, loss, and hope that fired his imagination. One day, while rummaging through the older boxes in his apartment, Robert found a yellowed photograph of his family, taken in Abyssinia, shortly before they left that land to take refuge elsewhere. The picture depicted his father with a broad smile across his face and his hand aptly posed on the shoulder of his son. Under that photograph was written a small note by his father: "Never forget where you come from." The photograph reignited a fire in Robert's heart. That evening, he sat at his desk and began writing a screenplay based on his childhood in Abyssinia. He poured his soul into the script, weaving together moments of joy and sorrow, hope and despair. The story followed a young boy named Samuel, who, like Robert, was forced to leave his homeland and rebuild his life in a foreign land. Robert, with his passion for the story, was rejected multiple times when pitching his screenplay to producers. Some said it was too niche, while others told him to focus on something more commercial. Frustrated but not deterred, he decided to produce the film himself. Robert spent months crowdfunding, reaching out to friends, family, and strangers who believed in his vision. He sold his car, maxed out his credit cards, and even took a second job to fund the project. Slowly but surely, the pieces began to come together. Filming started in a small studio in Brooklyn, but Robert knew the story wouldn't be complete without capturing the landscapes of Abyssinia. With what little money he had left, he booked a flight to Ethiopia, the country that once was his home. The feeling welled up as Robert stepped off the plane and was hit by a wave of emotion. Earthy and spicy aromas filled the air, something he had smelt as a child. The streets were alive, children laughing and playing, while vendors called out to passers-by. Still, amidst this vibrancy, Robert saw the struggles that forced his family to leave: poverty, political unrest, and the ache of wanting something more. With a tiny local crew, Robert started shooting in the villages and the landscapes that used to be his world. He went back to his childhood house, now deserted, and stood in the deserted space where he and his father once shared their dreams. One evening, as a scene was being wrapped up by the crew, an old man approached Robert. "You ain't from here, but walk with someone who's known this land for a long time," the man said. Robert smiled. "I once lived here, a long time ago. My dad always said we should never forget where we come from." The man nodded, his eyes glistening. "Then tell our story well, son. Let the world see who we are." Months later, after many late nights and sacrifices, Robert's film, The Boy from Abyssinia, premiered at a small independent film festival in New York. He had no idea what to expect. His heart was racing as the lights dimmed and the opening scene played on the screen. For 90 minutes, The audience was transported to the vibrant yet tumultuous world of Abyssinia. They laughed, cried, and sat in stunned silence as Samuel's journey unfolded. By the time the credits rolled, the theater erupted in applause. After the screening, a woman approached Robert, tears streaming down her face. "I'm from Sudan," she said. "Your story. It felt like my story. Thank you for showing the world what it means to leave everything behind and start again." The film picked up steam, garnering critical acclaim and eventually landing a distribution deal. But for Robert, the greatest reward wasn't fame or financial success. It was the knowledge that he had honored his father's legacy and shared a piece of his homeland with the world. Years later, Robert returned to Abyssinia, not as a boy fleeing war, but as a man with a purpose. He established a foundation to support young storytellers in underserved communities, providing them with the tools and resources to share their narratives. During one of his visits to the village he was born, he stood upon a hill overseeing the village. The sun could set low from the horizon again, just the way it happened all those years ago. Then he thought about his father's words that had made him go through every trial when he said, "Embrace change, and the world will embrace you back." As the wind whistled through the leaves of the trees, Robert smiled. He had finally come full circle to prove that even the most painful changes can be something beautiful. He wrote a memoir in his old age called Embracing Change, a journey from Abyssinia to the world stage. It was a bestseller and inspired so many people to stand up against their own battles with courage and resilience. He was attending a book signing at which time he was approached by a young man and asked, "Mr. Robert, if you could go back in time and change anything, would you?" He took his time to think of the question posed before answering it. "No," he said, "because every hardship, every setback, every moment of doubt, it all led me here. Change isn't something to fear. It's the path to discovering who we truly are." As he signed the young man's book, Robert felt at peace. He had accepted change, and in so doing, he had discovered not only his purpose, but himself.